and welcome to the practical Parsha for Parshat Beshalach. Parshat Beshalach is in the book of Shemot, the book of Exodus, chapter 14, it begins with verse 17. And of course it begins with telling us where it led off last week. The Jews left Egypt, and it says, when Pharaoh sent the people out of Egypt, and God took them in a roundabout way through the desert, and we come to the very significant miracle of the splitting of the sea. And that's how we come about it, because the way they traveled, the route they took, necessitated them to cross that body of water. And when they couldn't cross it, that's when Hashem made the miracle. And as I emphasized, this class is about the practical Parsha. We are here to endeavor to try to find, and it's not that hard, you don't have to try that hard, but there's always those practical lessons in the Parsha that are certainly always there, and many of them just pop right out at you. Some of them you have to sometimes search for, but certainly that is the purpose of the story in the first place, right? The Torah tells us the Parsha in order for us to learn how to live our lives as Jews, on a spiritual level, but also on a practical level. Now, practical can be in practice of Judaism, but practical can also be in our lives, as we've done before in the past. We've, found things that can be practically applied to our day-to-day life. So let's fast forward to when the Jews are standing at the side of the water and they're panicking. They see the Egyptians behind them, right? And there's nowhere really to escape. Right? In fact, the Midrash tells us that on the other side, they looked and they tried to turn to see maybe they can run. And what do they see? They see wild animals. They were boxed in. They were closed in by the water. The Egyptians, wild animals, there's nowhere to go. What do they do now? And the Jews started to cry out to Moshe. They started to pray, but they also started to cry out to Moshe. And they complained a little bit. And what exactly did Moshe tell them? He says, don't worry, Hashem, you'll see. Hashem will fight for you. Hashem will do the actual fighting, the winning of the war. You just stand there, and these Egyptians that you see now, you'll never see again. I'm paraphrasing. Let's look at chapter 14, verse 15. Chapter 14, verse 15. Hashem said to Moshe, why do you cry out to me? Speak to Bnei Israel, speak to the children of Israel, and let them move on. Let them travel. Just forge ahead. So you see over here, he tells them, why are you crying out to me? In other words, and like Rashi comments, stop praying. Moshe stood there and did what he knew best and what he felt compelled to do. Here the people are in a real dire situation. They're all panicking. They're all going crazy. He has full faith in God, but he's praying to Hashem, do something for them. I can try to imagine that his prayers were pull it off now, fight for them now. B, strengthen their faith. And C, can they stop screaming, please? No. C, can you please get them to really see what they truly believe on a deeper level, but right now they're panicking because they're going by what their eyes see and what the situation seems to be, and their minds just stop working and they're thinking with their hearts. And what does Hashem say? Stop praying. Why? Because I need you to talk to the people. I need you to get into action. And this is a very interesting thing. These words alone have a value. When I say a value, of course, all words in the Torah are valuable, but they have a lesson that it teaches us in life. Anytime we encounter any difficulty, any situation, especially when we see that somebody else is in a situation that needs help, and someone else is in a situation that requires our involvement. Just relying on prayer. Hashem says, don't pray to me. Do something. Go out there and do something. When you see people in need, when you see people in a situation, let's say, for example, We speak about it a lot. We try to fight assimilation. We see the dire results and the terrible, terrible circumstances that our entire people are facing because of ignorance, which is synonymous with and results in assimilation. Yeah, we can take out a book of Psalms and start saying Tehillim and start to pray and start to cry out to Hashem. Hashem, make the situation better. That has its right time and place. But what do we have to do? Go out there and help. You hear about a sick family, a poor family, people who need help, and there's something you can do about it. Go out there and help them. Go out there and do something about it. Just to pray, that's only when all else fails, or that other option is not available to you. And that's what Hashem was saying to him. In this situation, and we can imagine how special it was to Hashem to hear Moshe's prayers. And I'll tell you, interestingly, there's an interesting medrash actually that explains why Hashem did this whole, so to speak, this whole trick on the Jews, where he had them turn back, and for at least a short moment, it seemed like the Egyptians caught up with them, and it seemed like, again, all doom and gloom is back. And it says because Hashem enjoys the prayers of the Jewish people. He enjoys the prayers of the Jewish people. And therefore, when they were in Egypt, especially in the last period of time, they were praying to Hashem. And later it was turning into prayers of thanks, to prayers of hope. And it culminated with the offering of the Passover sacrifice. And at the night of Passover, they said a Hallel, prayers of thanks to Hashem, prayers of gratitude. But they came out of Egypt, and they're all busy with all their possessions and their children and everything else. And as elsewhere, namely in the end of last week's Parsha, Rashi points out, he quotes the Talmud, that all Jews left with much possessions. I mean, tremendous amount of possessions. The least that one took with him was 100 donkeys laden with goods. You know what that means? That's the least, the poorest guys. You know what I mean? Like the real unsuccessful ones. You can imagine the ones that were really well-to-do, or the ones that had a good entrepreneurial, abilities. Imagine that they left with thousands of donkeys. I mean, everybody was busy with their things, and they were all, engrossed in this amazing euphoric feeling. We're free, we're new people, this is great. And they let their guard down when it came to prayer. So Hashem tightened the ratchet a little bit, and suddenly they all started praying again. So we see that Hashem does enjoy prayer. And sometimes will even do things to, so to speak, orchestrate or incite the people that they should pray. But in this case, to Moshe, as a leader, as somebody who has the ability to direct the people and say, go, this is not the time. This is not the time to pray. And this tells us, the Rebbe points out, when, we see that when it comes to the situation with Judaism, you see people are out there and they need our attention to teach them Torah, to study with them, to pray with them, to help them do mitzvahs. It is our duty to even ourselves stop praying. Not only for them, but ourselves. In other words, lessen a little bit the time you pray and study for yourself, for your own connection to Hashem, and go out there and tell the Jews they should travel, they should forge ahead, they should go all towards, where? Towards Mount Sinai, which is figuratively here, towards the Torah, closer to Judaism. And this also brings to mind, especially that the Parsha of Beshalach, this Parsha, always coincides on the Shabbos after the 10th of Shvat. The 10th of Shvat is the anniversary of passing of the previous Lubavitcher Rebbe. The previous Lubavitcher Rebbe certainly does not need my approval or my highlighting his greatness. Okay. However, the previous Lubavitcher Rebbe is well known as somebody who had selflessness and self-sacrifice towards upholding the integrity of Judaism, even in the most dire of situations and circumstances, namely under the rule of the Soviet Union. He was there. He was the only. He was like, not only was he a pioneer in it, but he was almost like the Lone Ranger out there. He was the only one really holding up this whole massive structure on his shoulders, and they knew it, and that's why they tried to eliminate his powers and eliminate his ability, and they were always after him. Later, when he finally made it to the United States, and this is when Europe is up in flames, and his situation at the time, the reality of Judaism was terrible, terrible. I mean, it was hemorrhaging, okay? And, there was almost no blood left. That's how bad it was, okay? Anybody that was actually religious, anybody that was actually what they called from the old country, from the old home, was bemoaning the situation. In other words, it was so blatant, it was so obvious, they were losing the youth. And not only the youth, but even people who had come to the United States and they were fairly religious, had, managed already over a short period of time, to just slowly allow Judaism to fade away and, sadly, to become more engrossed, more assimilated, that's the word, into American culture. And it was really, really, really scary. And there were some great rabbis that clearly recognized the situation and clearly stood up to talk about the situation. But the previous Rebbe, his motto was, and he said, Tova pu'ula achat me'elef anachot. Better one action than 1,000 sighs. In other words, all these cries and all these committees and all these conferences that people gather to talk about, look how bad it is, and look at the statistics, and look at this, and we're losing our youth. They're fantastic. I mean, someone cares. But they're not going to accomplish anything. One small action, and we see how he did it. He even give you just one example, one classical example. And they established what they call the release time, or the Wednesday hour. Okay, there's a law, and it took time to get it approved, but there's a law in many states. I don't know if it's across the United States, I don't know if it's a federal law, but they're definitely in New York and some, where there's a big concentration of Jews, they certainly have it. Have it here in Florida, where on Wednesday, and it's considered to be part of the school hours, so the child is attending school, but the kids have an option to go and have religious instruction for an hour. It cannot be done, obviously, on school site, because, separation of church and state. But they could go on an approved off-site place, with approved party, to go and have their religious instruction. So imagine, for thousands and thousands of children who came from Jewish homes, some of them even from religious Jewish homes, who were attending public school and they had no other formal Jewish education. Some did actually, those times they would have in the afternoon, after school they would have what they call Talmud Torah. But during school hours, they certainly didn't. Moreover, thousands of kids came from homes that had already become very secularized, become very Americanized. They had absolutely no Jewish education. What was their exposure to Judaism? Passover, Hanukkah, and here and there, Yom Kippur, that's it. So what happened? They would send out the boys from yeshiva, the young scholars, the young students, I say rabbinical students, and they would send them on Wednesday. They would go, but it's that 1 hour usually require 2-3 hours, because you have to travel to your designated public school, pick up the kids, and there's an off-site location. Usually they would pick a synagogue or some community center nearby that they can use the facility, and it's approved, it's safe. And then there they would pray with the kids, teach them some Judaism, teach them a little reading, whatever you can get in an hour. And it's amazing over the years. You think, okay, 1 hour, what did they get? Over the years, that little one action, those little 1 hours, okay, amounted to, for some of these children, and I say some, I don't have the exact numbers, but a certain percent of these children, that not only did they have somewhere deep inside in them Judaism, which we don't know, we don't have the accounts of every single child that attended, every boy and girl that attended. What is the later effect, 40 years later, 50 years later, 60 years later, 70 years later. But there are those that are known that today lead today their grandparents, their parents, their grandparents, leading an entirely Jewish life due to their first initial their initial contact with Judaism through this program. This is just one example where the previous Rebbe, said, let's get up and do something. Okay, otherwise we're going to be sitting for the rest of the time, just, crying, praying, and that's the message. I want to fast forward as it describes what happened, that there was the waters split, right? Hashem said, tell them to go forward. And as they did, what happened? When they went into the water, that's when Hashem says to Moshe, lift your staff and lower it down, and the water split. And the Torah describes what it was like. Look at this. The Torah says that here, chapter 14, verse 22. It says, the Bnei Yisrael came into the water. They went into the midst of the sea on dry land. The waters were like a wall to them, to their right and to their left. What is a wall? A wall is usually synonymous with protection, right? We have a wall of a house. It protects you. It protects the people inside. Protection can also mean it provides the comfort, the shelter, right? That's what a wall is. The wall on the border, there are those who are for it, those who are against it. But certainly, even the ones who are against it will admit that it shuts out the unwanted. The question is, they're saying that they're unwanted. But the idea of a wall is that the wall, by definition, means that it parts two sides and it provides protection. It protects. It safeguards. So if we want to read this verse, and remember, once again, not only is something that happened back then, but it's something that happens in our lives. Just to remind you, this song that they sang, and we'll get to it soon, this song of praise that they sang, we say it every single day in the morning prayers. As our build-up, as our preparation to coming to say the Shema, as we build up our momentum and our excitement, so to speak, about godliness, as it's defined in Hasidic teachings, that each phase of the prayer is another level that we elevate and go higher and higher in our enthusiasm and excitement. As we're coming the closest to the blessings of Shema, we read the Az Yashir Moshe, which is the song that they sang then. So it tells us something, that it has actually a relevance to our day-to-day life, whatever took place there. So what is this thing in our lives? Where is this thing about the waters being on the right, the waters being on the left? What does this mean? And by the way, you see something else, another very interesting thing. The Torah could have just said, the waters stood on their either side. Either side is right or left, or forward and backward, front and back. What's the difference? So we know that metaphorically, right represents typically kindness, giving, or in this context that I'm going to talk about, riches, good, pleasantness. Left usually represents severity, harshness, restraint, right? And poverty. And the Rebbe talks about this. This is a message that the mayim, the waters, and I'll expound soon. What do we mean here when we say waters? The waters are a wall. They're like a protection, both from the right and the left. The right and the left are both the actual challenges that we have in life, or what we call the tests. In life we have many, many tests. And that's part of who we are, and that's part of what's meant to be. It's not a mistake. God tests us. The word nisayon, comes from the word nes. What does nes mean? Nes usually means a miracle. But the true definition of nes means on high. The reason why a miracle is called nes is because it's above, it's higher than nature. Right? Right? That's why it's called nes. Nisayon is a test. But what the test is meant to do is not to break you, or not, God forbid, to prove you wrong, but rather to elevate you even higher. But there are two types of tests. There's the test of the right, which is the riches, the good, when God just showers us with good. And then there is the test of poverty, oppression. And what the message over here is, the mayim, the waters, are a protection for them, for all children of Israel, perpetually for all generations, throughout all time. The waters serve as a protection both from the right and the left. You see, the waters represent the waters. And as the sages tell us, when the prophet says in the verse, behold, those who are thirsty go to water. People don't know, if you're thirsty, you got to drink water. What do you do? If you're thirsty, you can eat bread? Of course, if you're thirsty, you can eat water. Was he speaking to fools? No, it's telling us if you're thirsty for God, go to the water. And the Talmud tells us, Ein mayim ela Torah. What waters mean is exclusively Torah. The Torah is compared to water. So the water the Torah being engrossed and connected to the Torah can serve as a protection for a person both when there's this test or that test. Now, before I continue, it's certain that we all wish for ourselves, we all wish for others and our friends and those that we know, and everybody, all Klal Yisrael. And we should always have, the best preference, which is the test of riches. Mm-hmm. Please, everybody. Mm-hmm. However, sometimes the reality is, even when one is rich, even when things are good, even when there's no outside oppression, there's challenges in life. There are days that maybe feel more on the left rather than on the right. Mm-hmm. There are days which feel more on the right rather than on the left. And we need that Torah compass that helps you navigate, that helps you go straight and not fall off past the right rail and not fall off past the left rail. It's interesting that both of these can be very, very challenging and can be sometimes very, very grueling as a test. We understand that there were times, and fortunately, unfortunately, it's by Hashem's design, but that's just a typical expression. Unfortunately, the Jewish people have no shortage of the test of the left, of oppression, of challenge, of difficulty, of climbing out from the ashes, of having to clean off and shake off, the dust and the debris. And the debris, I'm talking about the pain and the scars and poverty, and degradation and everything else over the years. But then there's also the test of riches. And interestingly, the Rebbe spoke about this. In the 50s, the Rebbe spoke about this. And he described, how the test of riches, meaning the challenge that comes from the right, the good, the pleasant, can sometimes be more dangerous for our existence and more difficult in terms of a test, in terms of a challenge, more difficult to win than actually the other, the one that we were sadly, in the past at least, well used to. And that is, if I had to put it into words, meaning my own words, if I had to coin it, it's apathy. When one is very, very rich, when one is very, very affluent and enjoying life, you become apathetic to spirituality and you start to get engrossed in all the materialism. And that's exactly what happened here in America. Mm-hmm. Okay, and we spoke about it the other day, that without firing a shot, without having concentration camps, we're losing millions of Jews. And that's because, and a result of, we're accepted. Jews are like everybody else. Which again, don't get me wrong, I'm not saying, God forbid, that we should be oppressed. But the fact that this test is a more difficult one, and this is where you need the Torah. And this is why we go out there and try to learn Torah with people. Even when we're living in this pleasant and most blessed country of all times, America. And then for that matter, whole Western society, more or less. You'll always have some, anti-Semite here or there that's going to rear his ugly head or her ugly head and stick it out and make noise and, paint a little graffiti here and there. But for the most part, the Western world is, acceptance of all kind of people and all cultures and, get along and all of that, which is a good thing. Harmonious way of living. You don't have to be like your neighbor doesn't have to be like you, but you get along well, you can see eye to eye, you can agree to disagree. Even that is something which is Imagine if the Jews had that 200 years ago in Europe, 100 years ago in Europe. They would have been ecstatic. But that also creates the danger, where if you don't have that wall, or what we know today in computer terms, that firewall of Torah, that water that serves as a wall that congeals and helps you not to fall off, then you can, God forbid, easily slip away, and it becomes very, very, very difficult. Okay? The Rebbe even illustrated, I think it was in the 70s, there was a very, very famous, rich, eccentric person, if you remember, Howard Hughes. Okay? And then one day he just disappeared, and no one knew where he was. And it was in all the newspapers and everything. And the Rebbe actually spoke about it publicly. And the Rebbe said that, it came to his attention. And in other words, somebody must have brought to his attention that, wow, this is something amazing. And the Rebbe said, look at this. We know that everything that a Jew encounters has a meaning in their life. Especially the Baal Shem Tov says that everything that you hear or see is not by coincidence. Hashem made the person hear or see that. In other words, become aware of something. So obviously that has a direct lesson for you. So if this came to my attention, that means it has something to tell me. And the Rebbe gave us his analysis, and basically it breaks down to this. This guy had all the liberties in the world to do whatever he wanted. That's how rich he was. I mean, there were some countries, entire countries, that would just do anything at his just one whim. That's how powerful his influence was. He was so rich, but yet he was more poor than a poor man. In that sense, he was more poor than a homeless guy in the street. He may have owned mansions, planes, countries, islands, but he was so poor. Why? Because the poor man is not afraid to eat. Not afraid to eat. In fact, he might be eating from the garbage. Me and you would not eat from the garbage. Who knows? It's dirty, there's germs, there's bacteria. But he eats from the garbage. He's not afraid. He's not looking over his back. This guy had so much money, but he was so paranoid. He was just as paranoid, or maybe it was justified to some degree, that someone wants him dead. Somebody wants his money. So he didn't sleep in the same place in 2 nights. He didn't eat. He was scared to eat his food. So he had no freedom whatsoever. He had many liberties. He can buy whatever he wants, any car he wants, any house he wants, any city block he wants, any building he wants. But he wasn't a free man. So you can see sometimes just riches without, unabated can be a very, very dangerous thing in itself, besides the effect that it can have, like I mentioned before, assimilation and so on. So this is a very, very powerful lesson for us. Now, taking it a little further, just to go one more lesson, after the Jews finally cross, on page 176 in our book, which is chapter 15, it says, then Moshe and Bnei Yisrael sang this song to Hashem. However, if you look in the Hebrew, it says, Az Yashir Moshe. Literally, Yah, when you add a Yud as a prefix to the word Shar, it makes it future tense. Okay? The only other tense it can be is if it's all the time. But in this case, the literal translation should have been, Az Yashir Moshe, then Moshe will sing. It should have said, Az Shar Moshe, then Moshe sang together with all of Israel. So the sages tell us that what does this teach us? That these very same people that sang then, they will sing again. When are they going to sing again? By the ultimate song. When is that? As it says in the Psalms, Shiru Hashem Shir Chadash, sing for Hashem a new song. That's when Mashiach comes. So the sages tell us, from here we see, this is one of the proofs of the resurrection of the dead, because these very same people are going to sing again. Okay? Now here's just something that just jumped out at me. In other words, while they're singing this, they weren't just thinking about the miracle that just happened, the past miracle, or the current miracle, but this also now is connected to the future. And certainly as we say it every day, when we sing it every day, we're reminded not only of the miracles that happened in the past, And also, one of the reasons we say it is that person should remember every day that miracles happen. It's just that we don't necessarily see them. And just because they're not as monumental and earth-shattering as the sea splitting in front of our eyes doesn't mean they're not taking place and they're not as important or great. And we should be grateful about them. But it also tells us something very powerful. That simultaneously, what are we thinking about? The future. Mashiach. And that immediately creates a yearning, a desire, and therefore a yearning, and therefore that should trigger us to pray and to ask Hashem for Mashiach. And I think that's an amazing thing, because psychologically, typically, when we are enjoying a success, a victory, and you can see in history, for some great armies, that's when the danger began. Because what happens is, immediately, we turn into complacency mode. It's great. You feel good. You get that euphoric feeling. You get that, those what do they call them? The chemicals that spurt out.
Serotonin.
You just feel good. And you're like, wow, everything's good. You know, especially if you've been working hard for something, you've been going through it, and then suddenly, wow. And with those moments, you forget the fact that I have to pray for the future. Mm-hmm. Or, better said, no matter how good we can have it here now, during this time period, as we're here, this definitely is no match to what is going to be when Mashiach comes. So if we just become happy with what is right now, and therefore that turns us into becoming complacent, that is a big danger. That is terrible. And therefore, the Torah tells us, Az Yeshir Moshe, even while they're singing then, even while they're enjoying and doing the right thing, they're thanking Hashem, they're saying their prayers of gratefulness to Hashem for His tremendous miracle. Now, wow, look, we're rid of the Egyptians, we're really, really free, this feels so good. But immediately they're reminded, and they're reminding themselves, and they're reminding us, don't forget of the future. Don't forget, this is not the ultimate. Mm-hmm. As great as this is right now, you just won the lottery, this is not the ultimate. Okay? You just won the jackpot. Not the ultimate. Okay? So you were sick and now you're healed. Everything is good. It's not the ultimate. There's still something more that we need. And therefore, yes, you need to enjoy the moment. You need to sing the song. You need to say thank you, Hashem. You need to make the blessings. You need to sing the praise. But at the same time, don't stop praying for that more that needs to come. Otherwise, you're going to slip right back into a very bad place. Anyway, Hashem should help. We should always have a lot to be thankful for, a lot to be praising Hashem for. We should have a lot of the right. Okay, let's deal with that test. I think we can handle it. We'll do our best. But the main thing is we should never lose sight, and we should always use it and utilize it, that is, in the proper manner. Shalom.